I still remember that morning as if it's etched into my skin, the way small details sometimes brand themselves into memory without asking. The sun was breaking through the Seattle clouds, spilling a watery light across the living room, and I was already running late. It was Mom's 60th birthday lunch, and I'd promised myself I'd get there on time for once. But as I rummaged through my purse, checking every pocket, every zipper, every tiny compartment, panic began to build. My car keys weren't there. I dumped everything out onto the marble entryway, table, lipstick, receipts, even an old conference badge from work. Nothing. A frustration bubbled up inside me as I muttered under my breath, knowing I had checked that same purse 3 times already. Something wasn't right. I slipped off my heels to retrace my steps, bare feet pressing against the cool floor, each step echoing in the too quiet house. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I told myself it was nothing, just a case of misplacing things, maybe in the bedroom where I had rushed to change earrings earlier. But as I padded softly toward the staircase, an odd weight pressed down on me. The house felt different, heavier, like the air itself knew something I didn't. Normally, I'd call out to Daniel, my husband of 5 years, just to let him know I was back inside. But that day, something in me hesitated. I don't know if it was instinct, or fear, or maybe a whisper from some deep part of myself that already suspected the truth. Halfway up the stairs, I froze. There it was, Daniel's voice. Low. Intimate. The kind of tone I hadn't heard directed at me in months. My heart did this strange stutter, a mixture of hope and dread, colliding all at once. Maybe he was planning something for me, some surprise to make up for the distance that had been growing between us. But then another sound joined his, a woman's laugh, soft and familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. I leaned closer, the wood of the banister cool against my fingertips, trying to be sure I wasn't imagining it. But the next words burned through my chest, undeniable. She has no idea, does she? The voice was sharp, almost pitying. And it belonged to Rachel, my younger sister. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My throat closed as if invisible hands were pressing against it, making every breath jagged and shallow. I edged closer, pressing myself against the wall just outside the bedroom door. The voices grew clearer through the narrow gap, their laughter twisting into knives that cut deeper with every passing second. I wanted to run, to burst in and demand answers, but my legs refused to move. My body locked in place as though my heart had already known this betrayal was coming, and the rest of me was only now catching up. The sight through that thin crack confirmed it. Daniel, his shirt undone, sitting on the edge of our bed, my bed, with Rachel stretched across the pillows like she belonged there. My whole world collapsed in that moment, though I hadn't even begun to realize how much deeper the lies would go. Through that narrow opening in the bedroom door, the scene felt unreal, like something torn from the pages of a book I never wanted to read. Daniel's hand traced along Rachel's arm, his voice low, tender, and cutting all at once. I had to press my fist against my lips to keep from making a sound, to keep from screaming and shattering the illusion they thought they were safe inside. I had never felt so invisible in my own home. Standing just inches from the man I had vowed to love forever and the sister I had grown up believing would always protect me. Rachel's laugh drifted out again, this time sharper, crueler. She's always been so naive, hasn't she? Emily never questions anything. She believes whatever story she's told. Daniel chuckled in agreement, a sound that used to make me feel safe but now only made me sick. Yeah. He said, she actually believed all those late nights at the office. She believed I needed space to work on us. She even believed I still loved her. The words pierced me like shards of glass, each one cutting deeper than the last. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop listening, no matter how much I wanted to. Rachel's voice lowered, intimate, conspiratorial, and she has no clue about the inheritance, does she? Inheritance? The words slammed into me with the force of a train. My mind scrambled, reaching for meaning. What inheritance? I had never heard of one. Our parents weren't wealthy. We grew up in a modest house with barely enough to cover college tuition. What could she mean? Daniel leaned back on the bed, his expression one of smug satisfaction. No, she doesn't know a thing. Margaret and Rachel made sure of that. And why would we tell her? She doesn't need it. She's too trusting, too blind to even realize when she's being played. My knees buckled, and I slid down against the wall, the wallpaper scraping my shoulder as I crumpled to the floor. Betrayal in love was one thing. Betrayal by blood by my own sister was something else entirely. My chest ached, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out from the sheer weight of it. Rachel's tone hardened. Exactly. Emily doesn't deserve it. She never has. She always thought she was Dad's favorite, but she has no idea what really happened. And she won't unless we tell her. Which we won't. Dad. My heart twisted. He had been gone for 3 years, and I had mourned him every day since. The idea that his memory held secrets I'd never been allowed to know made the grief twist into something sharper, uglier. Daniel leaned closer to Rachel, his lips brushing against her temple. Besides, he said, even if she did find out, she wouldn't know what to do. She doesn't have the guts to fight back. She's too soft. Too gullible. That's why she'll never see us coming. My fingers dug into the carpet, nails biting deep, trying to ground myself as the room around me spun. Every word was a blow, every laugh, a knife. The man who once told me I was his world, and the sister who once held my hand through childhood storms, were conspiring not just against my heart but against my very identity. I wanted to scream, to burst through the door, and demand answers. But fear held me frozen, and something deeper instinct told me to wait, to listen, to gather the truth before confronting them. Rachel shifted, her voice taking on a cruel amusement. She still thinks Mom loves her the same way she loves me. Remember when we were kids? How easy it was to convince Emily she was just imagining things whenever Mom treated us differently. She actually believed it all these years. Daniel smirked. She still believes it. That's the best part. My stomach churned. I remembered those childhood moments vividly. Mom brushing Rachel's hair longer, keeping her secrets closer, always favoring her just slightly. I had dismissed it as my own insecurity, and now here they were, confirming everything I had tried so hard not to believe. But worse than that was the mention of an inheritance. Something I was never supposed to know about. Something that had been deliberately kept from me. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle the sob threatening to escape. The taste of blood hit my tongue where my teeth had bitten through the skin of my knuckle. I barely felt the pain. All I felt was the crushing weight of betrayal, suffocating me from every angle. And then Daniel asked a question that made my world tilt even further. When are you going to tell her about the will? About what your father really left behind? Rachel's reply came swift, cold. Never. Emily doesn't need to know. She doesn't deserve to know. The lawyer said exactly what we paid him to say. She'll go on living in her happy little bubble, thinking she's part of this family, when in reality, she's nothing. Nothing. That word ripped through me, crueler than any of the others. The house I had lived in, the marriage I thought I had, the family I believed in, it all felt like it was collapsing around me, every brick falling away to reveal something rotten at the core. I don't remember how long I stayed there, crouched against the wall, listening to my husband and my sister dismantle my entire life piece by piece. At some point, the tears stopped. At some point, the pain numbed into something else, something cold, something that began to whisper in my ear. You can't let this go. You have to know everything. The voices inside the room grew softer, and I heard the sound of Daniel's laughter mixing with Rachel's sighs. I didn't wait to hear more. I pulled myself to my feet, legs trembling, and stumbled down the hallway. I barely registered the staircase under my feet, barely felt the cold floor as I reached the front door and slipped outside. The sky above Seattle had darkened with heavy clouds, but I welcomed the rain on my face. It disguised my tears, washed away the last remnants of disbelief clinging to me. Inside that house, the people I loved most had decided I was expendable. They thought I would never notice, never fight back. They thought I was weak. But they were wrong. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel of my car. I don't remember how I ended up there, sitting in the driver's seat with the keys I thought I'd lost resting miraculously in the cup holder. Maybe I had dropped them earlier in my rush. Maybe someone had placed them there. None of it mattered. What mattered was the truth I had overheard. My marriage was a lie. My sister was a traitor, and my family, my very identity, was built on secrets they had deliberately hidden from me. The betrayal was complete. Love, loyalty, trust, everything had been shattered in one afternoon. And somewhere, buried beneath the heartbreak, a new part of me began to awaken. A part that wanted answers. A part that wanted justice. I wasn't just a wife who'd been cheated on. I wasn't just a sister betrayed. I was a woman standing at the edge of a truth far larger than I could comprehend. And I knew this was only the beginning. I drove aimlessly that afternoon, the streets of Seattle blurring past me through the sheen of rain on my windshield. I couldn't bring myself to go back into that house, back into the space where my husband and my sister whispered about how gullible I was, about secrets I was never supposed to know. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out, like someone had scooped the life out of me and left me walking around as nothing but skin and bone. The word inheritance echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. I tried to remember if anyone had ever mentioned it, if my father had said anything before he passed away, if Mom had hinted at something. But no matter how hard I searched my memory, there was nothing. It was as if a whole chapter of my life had been ripped out of the book and hidden somewhere I couldn't reach. And then, slowly, other memories began to surface. Memories I had buried because they didn't fit, because they didn't make sense, because I had trained myself not to look too closely. I remembered the way Mom Margaret always dodged questions about my baby years. When I was little, maybe 6 or 7, I once asked her to tell me about the day I was born. She smiled tightly and said something vague about how fast it all happened, how exhausting but wonderful it was. Then she quickly changed the subject, asking if I wanted cookies. At the time, I thought she was just tired, maybe sad about Dad. But now, replaying it in my mind, I could see the shadows behind her smile. There were other times too. Times when Rachel would bring out her baby book pictures of her first steps, her first Christmas, her first haircut, and Mom would coo and laugh as they flipped through the pages together. I'd ask to see mine, and Margaret would pause, her fingers stiff on the edge of the photo album, before saying, "Oh, I don't know where it is right now, Emily. Maybe packed away in the attic." But it never appeared. I remembered holidays when relatives would say things like, "Rachel looks so much like you, Margaret," or, "She has your eyes, your smile." But with me, they were quieter. Sometimes they said I had Dad's nose, or that I was tall like him, but never once did anyone say I looked like Margaret. Not once. The pieces began to click together, jagged and terrifying. The laughter between Rachel and Daniel, their comments about how naive I was, about an inheritance, about Dad, maybe they weren't just mocking me. Maybe they were telling the truth. And what truth was that? I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. For years, I'd brushed off the feeling of being on the outside of my own family. The inside jokes between Rachel and Mom, the way Mom always seemed slightly more patient with her, more protective. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that every family had small imbalances. But now? Now it felt like I had been living inside someone else's story. I pulled over into a quiet park, the kind of place where dog walkers passed by with umbrellas and joggers splashed through puddles with determined faces. I sat in my car, staring at the rain streaking across the glass, and let the questions eat me alive. What if Margaret wasn't my mother? The thought alone made my stomach twist. Margaret had raised me. She'd packed my school lunches, taught me how to ride a bike, stayed up with me when I was sick. She was my mother in every way that mattered. Wasn't she? But then why had she avoided telling me about my birth? Why were there no baby photos? Why did she look at me sometimes with this strange distance? As if she were forcing herself to bridge a gap no one else could see. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, my breath fogging the glass in front of me. The betrayal from Daniel and Rachel had gutted me, but this possibility was like a second knife carving away whatever was left of me. If Margaret wasn't my mother, then who was I? I thought back to Dad's funeral 3 years ago. I remembered standing at the graveside while Margaret clutched Rachel's hand so tightly, tears streaking her cheeks. She cried, of course loud, aching sobs that echoed in the cemetery air. But when she looked at me, her grief seemed different. It was as though she was mourning something else entirely, something deeper and hidden. I had chalked it up to stress, to the natural chaos of losing the man she'd spent decades with. But now, replaying it, I wondered if her tears had been for something far more complicated. A memory surfaced then, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was maybe 10 years old, playing outside when a neighbor stopped by. She was older, one of those women who knew everyone's business, and she bent down to pat my head. "You're such a pretty girl," she said, squinting at me, then glancing toward Margaret who was standing nearby. You don't look much like your mama though, do you? Margaret had frozen. For the briefest moment, her face went pale, her eyes wide. Then she laughed it off, saying, "Oh, she takes after her father." Spitting image, but the neighbor just nodded slowly, her eyes curious, before walking away. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, years later, I realized how much effort Margaret had put into that laugh. How much she'd wanted to bury the question. I sat back, my pulse racing. Maybe the inheritance wasn't just about money. Maybe it was about identity. Maybe it was about who I really was. The thought made my skin crawl. My entire life, my name, my family, my place in the world suddenly felt fragile, like tissue paper stretched too thin. One more tug, and it would rip apart completely. As I sat there, lost in a storm of memories and doubts, I pulled out my phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through the gallery of family photos. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, Rachel blowing out birthday candles while Margaret stood proudly beside her. In most of the photos, I was there too, smiling, holding a plate, opening gifts. But when I looked closer, it hit me like a slap. I always seemed slightly apart. Rachel and Margaret leaned into each other naturally, their shoulders touching, their eyes bright with a bond that went unspoken. I was often just to the side, included but not truly connected. How had I not seen it before? Because I didn't want to. Because I had convinced myself that family meant unconditional love, and if I admitted something was wrong, it would mean I didn't belong at all. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away, forcing myself to breathe. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever secrets they had kept, whatever inheritance Daniel and Rachel were laughing about, it all tied back to this gnawing suspicion. That Margaret wasn't my mother. And if she wasn't, then who was? I tried to imagine it. Another woman holding me as a baby, whispering lullabies, smiling down at me with a face I couldn't picture. Did she look like me? Did she love me? Did she even know that I existed, or had she been erased from my life before I was old enough to form a memory? The questions circled endlessly, feeding on each other, driving me closer to the edge of panic. I clutched the steering wheel and whispered to myself, I need answers. I couldn't keep living in shadows. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had already lost my marriage. I had already lost my trust in Rachel. But if I didn't confront Margaret, I risked losing myself entirely. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a small hotel downtown, the kind of anonymous place where no one would think to find me. Lying on the stiff bedspread, staring at the ceiling, I replayed every moment of my life with Margaret, every time she'd hugged me, every time she'd scolded me. Every time she'd brushed me off with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. And for the first time, I admitted it to myself fully, without hesitation, without denial. Maybe I wasn't her daughter. Maybe I wasn't who I thought I was at all. The thought was terrifying, but it was also clarifying, because once you name the fear, once you shine a light on it, you know what you have to do. I had to find the truth. No matter how much it hurt. No matter what it cost. And I would start with Margaret. The following afternoon, I drove toward my childhood home with a weight in my chest heavier than any storm cloud hanging above Seattle. Margaret's birthday celebration was supposed to be a happy family gathering, cake, laughter, a few awkward jokes about age. Instead, to me, it felt like walking into an interrogation chamber. My mind ran through the plan over and over. I wouldn't confront her outright, not yet. I would ease into it, plant questions, and watch her carefully. I needed to know the truth, but more than that, I needed her to say it. The moment I walked into the familiar ranch-style house, the smell of roast chicken and cinnamon rolls nearly undid me. This was the house where I had learned to tie my shoes, where I had decorated Christmas cookies as a child. Yet, as I crossed the threshold, the warmth that should have comforted me now pressed against me like a lie. Margaret was in the kitchen, her silver hair perfectly styled, her lipstick a shade too red, the same shade she had worn for years. She smiled when she saw me, but something in her eyes faltered for a split second before she recovered. "Emily, there you are," she said. "I was starting to think you weren't coming." I forced a smile. Of course I wouldn't miss it. "Happy birthday, Mom." She kissed my cheek, and for a moment, I almost forgot. Almost believed in the performance we had been putting on for decades. But then I remembered Rachel's laughter, Daniel's voice, the word inheritance, and the hollow return to my chest. The living room filled slowly with relatives and neighbors. Rachel wasn't there yet, thank God. I wasn't sure I could handle her smug grin in that moment. Margaret busied herself pouring coffee, offering cake, flitting about like the perfect hostess. But as I watched her from across the room, every detail stood out differently. The stiffness of her shoulders, the way she glanced at me and then quickly looked away, as if afraid of being seen too clearly. When most of the guests had settled, I slipped into the kitchen, cornering her by the counter. My heart thudded in my ears as I began. "Mom," I said softly. "Do we still have my baby pictures?" Margaret blinked. "What?" "My baby pictures. You know, from the hospital, when I was born." I realized I've never really seen them. "Do you have any?" Her hands stilled on the coffee pot. For a fraction of a second, her face went pale. Then she forced a laugh. "Of course we do. They're in the albums upstairs." I tilted my head, watching her closely. "Not those. I mean the early ones. In the hospital, me wrapped in a blanket, you holding me. Those kinds of pictures." Her fingers trembled against the porcelain cup she was holding. I could see it clearly now, the panic rising behind her practiced smile. "Why are you asking about that?" she whispered, her voice sharper than I expected. I forced my tone to stay casual. "I don't know. I guess I've been thinking about family history lately. Daniel and I," my throat tightened at the lie. "We were talking about kids. I just wanted to know more about when I was born." The cup clattered onto the counter. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Finally, she said, "Emily, why don't you tell me what's really going on?" I felt my knees weaken, but I stood tall, staring at her. "I just want to know the truth." Her eyes glistened. She looked away, out the kitchen window, her hands clutching the edge of the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. I had seen my mother Margaret angry, cheerful, strict, affectionate. But I had never seen her like this. She looked cornered. "You've always been such a curious child," she said finally, her voice breaking. "But I hoped you wouldn't ask this. I hoped you'd never force me to say it out loud." My breath caught. "Say what?" She turned back to me, and I saw the truth in her eyes before she even spoke. "Emily, I'm not your biological mother." The room tilted, the air seemed to vanish, and I had to grip the table to stay upright. My mouth went dry. Even though I had suspected it, hearing the words spoken out loud was like being struck by lightning. "What?" I whispered. She swallowed hard. "Your father. He was married before me. His first wife, her name was Isabel Morales. She was a beautiful woman, a teacher, Mexican-American. She was your mother." My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear her. Isabel Morales. A name I had never known. A woman erased from my history. "She died," Margaret continued, her voice cracking, "when you were just 6 months old. A car accident. It was." She stopped, shaking her head. "It was sudden. Tragic." I stared at her, my chest burning. "And you never told me? Not once in 30 years? Tears welled in her eyes. "I should have. I know I should have. But your father, he couldn't bear to talk about her. And when he and I married, it was easier to let you grow up believing I was your mother. Easier for everyone. Easier for you, Isbeth." Her lips trembled. "Emily, please." I shook my head, stepping back. Images flashed through my mind. All the times she had brushed off my questions. All the times she had chosen Rachel. All the subtle ways I had been left out. It wasn't my imagination. I had always been different because I was different. "What about Rachel?" I asked, my voice shaking. "She's mine," Margaret whispered. "Yours and your father's. She's your half-sister. We told everyone you were twins because it was easier than explaining. Easier than reopening old wounds." I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. "So all those years, I wasn't crazy. You treated us differently because I wasn't yours." Her face crumpled. "I tried, Emily. God, I tried. I loved you in my own way. But every time I looked at you, I saw Isabel. I saw the woman who had everything I wanted. And I hated myself for feeling that way." End quote. Her words sliced through me. I had wanted her to deny it, to say I was imagining things, to insist she loved me as much as Rachel. But instead, she admitted it. She admitted that she had raised me under a shadow of resentment. And the inheritance? I whispered. What did Dad leave me? Margaret flinched. Silence hung in the air like a noose. Finally, she said. Half. He left you half of everything. The house, the savings, the insurance. But we, Rachel and I, we told you there was nothing. We made sure you never saw the will. We convinced the lawyer to present a different version. My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair. My head spun, my hands shaking. It was true. Every word Rachel had laughed about, every cruel whisper I had overheard. It was all true. You stole it, I said hoarsely. You stole my life, my name, my family, my inheritance. You let me grow up believing lies. Margaret sobbed, reaching for me, but I pulled back. I did it because I thought it was best. You had Daniel. You had your own life. Rachel. She needed more. She needed the security. She was fragile. I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to me. And I didn't? I didn't need love? I didn't need to know who I was? She collapsed into a chair across from me, her face buried in her hands. For the first time in my life, I saw her without her armor, without the perfect lipstick, the perfect smile, the perfect control. Just a woman crushed under the weight of her choices. But it didn't matter. It was too late. I stood slowly, my legs trembling but steady enough to hold me. I need to see it. The will. My birth certificate. I need proof. She lifted her face, streaked with tears. They're in your father's study. In the safe behind the bookshelf. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Then I'll find them. And when I do, nothing will ever be the same again. End quote. As I walked out of the kitchen, past the photographs of birthdays and holidays lining the hallway walls, I realized something. I had never really belonged in those pictures. And now I knew why. I wasn't Margaret's daughter. I was Isabel's. And it was time I claimed the life they had stolen from me. My legs carried me down the hallway as if on autopilot, though my heart thundered like a war drum in my chest. Margaret's confession echoed in my ears with every step. They're in your father's study. In the safe behind the bookshelf. That study had always been Dad's sanctuary. As a child, I'd tiptoe past the heavy oak door, catching glimpses of him bent over his desk, stacks of papers surrounding him, the smell of tobacco clinging to the air even long after he'd quit smoking. He never let me rummage around in there, always saying, "A man's study is where his thoughts live, Emmy. Some things are private." At the time, I thought it was a gentle excuse to keep me from messing with his things. Now, I understood. His secrets had been buried in that room all along. The study door creaked open under my hand, the hinges groaning like a warning. Dust floated in the slanted light of late afternoon, settling on bookshelves lined with law tomes, philosophy volumes, and framed certificates from decades past. The leather chair still sat where he'd left it, angled slightly toward the window as though he might return at any moment. I went straight to the bookshelf Margaret had mentioned. My hands shook as I ran my fingers along the spines, searching for anything out of place. Then I saw it a row of old encyclopedias, their leather cracked and faded, but one volume pushed forward just slightly. With trembling determination, I pulled it out. The entire section of shelving shifted with a heavy click, revealing a steel safe set into the wall. My stomach clenched. This was it. This was the vault of truth, the chamber that had been deliberately hidden from me for decades. The safe's dial gleamed faintly in the dim light. I hesitated. Margaret had said the combination was behind the bookshelf, but she hadn't given me the numbers. Instinct told me to try the most obvious possibility. Dad's birthday. My fingers trembled as I spun the dial to the familiar digits, the 17th of August 1958. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a dull metallic clunk, the safe released. The door swung open slowly, the scent of old paper and faint tobacco wafting out. Inside were neat stacks of envelopes, manila folders, and a small bundle tied with a faded blue ribbon. My breath caught when I saw the topmost document, a will, its edges yellowed but intact. I pulled it out carefully, laying it on the desk, my eyes scanning the handwritten text. It was unmistakably Dad's handwriting, firm, deliberate strokes that I'd seen countless times in birthday cards and notes. And there it was in black ink, I hereby leave half of my estate to my beloved daughter, Emily Carter, born to my late wife, Isabel Morales. Tears stung my eyes. Half. He had wanted me to have half. Not Rachel. Not Margaret. Me. My hands shook as I flipped through the rest. The life insurance, the savings, the house, all of it meant to be shared equally between me and Rachel. And yet, for 3 years, I had lived believing it all belonged to them, that I had been left with nothing. They had stolen everything. The anger burned hot through my veins, but beneath it was something else, a deep, aching sorrow. Not just for the money, but for the betrayal. For the knowledge that my father's last wishes had been twisted and buried by the people I trusted most. I set the will aside and reached for the next document, my birth certificate. My breath hitched when I saw the name written in elegant script under Mother. Isabel Morales. Not Margaret. Not the woman who raised me with distance and quiet resentment, but a stranger. A stranger who had given me life. The room blurred as tears spilled freely. I traced Isabel's name with my fingertip, whispering it like a prayer. Mom. Ever say. I had always called Margaret Mom, but in that moment, the word felt stolen, misplaced. This paper proved what my heart had begun to suspect. I didn't belong to her. I belonged to Isabel, a woman whose face I couldn't picture, whose voice I had never heard, but whose blood ran in my veins. And then my eyes fell on the bundle tied with the ribbon. My fingers hesitated before untying it, as if opening it would be opening a door I could never close again. The ribbon slipped loose, and a stack of letters spilled into my lap. The top envelope was addressed in Dad's familiar handwriting. To my dearest Emily. My throat tightened. With trembling hands, I unfolded the first letter. My dearest Emily. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I pray your mother Margaret has found the courage to tell you the truth. But knowing her as I do, I fear she may not have. So I must do it myself, even if only through these pages. I gripped the paper tightly, my eyes devouring every word. Your real mother's name was Isabel. She was the kindest, bravest woman I ever knew. She was beautiful dark hair, soft eyes, a laugh that could fill an entire room. And she loved you, Emily. She loved you more than life itself. Even when the cancer weakened her, she held you for hours, singing Spanish lullabies, whispering stories of her childhood in Mexico. She wanted you to grow up knowing both worlds, American and Mexican, heritages tied together in you. The tears came hot and relentless. I pressed the paper to my lips as if I could inhale Isabel's presence through my father's words. She made me promise that when you were old enough, I would tell you everything about her. She didn't want you to feel like she had disappeared without leaving you her story. But I was weak. When she died in that car accident, I couldn't bear the thought of reopening the wound. I let Margaret convince me it was easier for you not to know. Easier for her to raise you as her own. I see now how wrong I was. For that, I am deeply sorry. I read the letter again and again, each word carving itself into my heart. Then I reached for the next. And the next. One letter described Isabel's courage during her final months, how she smiled through the pain, how she kissed me on the forehead and whispered, "Sé fuerte, mi amor, be strong, my love." Another recounted the first time I giggled, how Isabel had cried tears of joy even though her body was failing. Another told me how much my father regretted allowing Margaret's bitterness to shape my childhood. The final letter was different. Dated just weeks before his death, it was addressed to Margaret. Margaret, I know you think I don't see the resentment you carry, but I do. I see the way you look at Emily, the way you favor Rachel, the way you punish Emily for being Isabel's daughter. I understand your pain. I understand the guilt. But she is innocent. She deserves love, not lies. If you cannot love her as your own, then you must at least honor my wishes. Give her Isabel's jewelry, her photographs, her letters. Give her what belongs to her. Do not let her grow up in shadows. I slammed the paper down, my chest heaving. Margaret had read this. She had read his plea. And she had ignored it. Instead of honoring his wishes, she had buried them. Instead of giving me Isabel's memory, she had stolen it. Instead of giving me my inheritance, she had taken it for herself and Rachel. For 30 years, I had been living in a house of lies. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed, my body shaking with grief and rage. My father had wanted me to know. Isabel had wanted me to know. And yet, Because of Margaret's choices, I had grown up believing in a false version of myself, stripped of my heritage, my history, my truth. But as the sobs slowly subsided, something else began to rise within me. A fire. A determination. I folded the letters carefully and tucked them into my bag. I gathered the will, the birth certificate, every piece of evidence I could find. These weren't just papers. They were proof. Proof of who I was. Proof of what had been stolen from me. Proof that the betrayal I had endured wasn't just a suspicion, but a crime. When I stood, my legs were shaky, but my resolve was steady. For the first time in my life, I felt clarity. I knew who I was. I was Emily Carter, but I was also Isabel Morales' daughter. And I would not let Margaret or Rachel erase that from me ever again. As I closed the safe and slid the bookshelf back into place, I whispered into the empty room, my voice trembling but fierce. Dad, I forgive you for your silence. Mom Isabel, I will carry your name, and as for Margaret and Rachel, they're going to pay for what they did. And in that dim study, surrounded by dust and shadows, I felt a strange new strength settle into my bones. The kind of strength I imagined Isabel had carried when she sang me to sleep despite her pain. The kind of strength my father had begged Margaret to honor. I would not be naive anymore. The truth was mine now, and I would use it to burn down every lie they had built around me. I don't remember driving away from the house that night. One moment I was in my father's study, clutching the bundle of letters against my chest, the truth burning like fire in my veins. The next, I was back in my car, the city lights of Seattle sliding past in a blur. My entire world had collapsed, and yet beneath the wreckage, a strange clarity had begun to take shape. Margaret had lied. Rachel had conspired. Daniel had betrayed me. They had stolen not just money, but decades of my life, my identity, my history, my mother's name. For years, I had swallowed my doubts, brushed away the unease, told myself I was imagining things. But no more. The letters, the will, the birth certificate, they were my weapons now. And I intended to use them. Still, the enormity of it all threatened to crush me. I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone I could trust, someone outside the poisonous web of my family. That's when one name came to mind. Claire Donovan. Claire had been my best friend since college, the kind of woman who carried both warmth and steel in equal measure. She was sharp, witty, unafraid of conflict. After law school, she had become a rising star in estate litigation, fighting cases that others were too timid to touch. More importantly, she had never once betrayed my trust. I pulled into a quiet parking lot, my hands trembling as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice familiar and grounding. Emily? It's late. Are you okay? For a moment, I couldn't speak. The tears came again, hot and relentless. Claire, I whispered. I need your help. I don't know who else to call. Within 30 minutes, she was at my hotel room, still in her work clothes, hair pulled into a neat bun. She dropped her bag on the chair, her eyes widening as she took in my disheveled state, the letters scattered across the bed, the documents fanned out like evidence in a trial. Emily, she said gently, what happened? So I told her. Everything. The affair. The whispers I'd overheard. Margaret's confession. The safe. The will. Isabel's name. The stolen inheritance. By the time I finished, my voice was hoarse, my body trembling from the release of holding it all in. Claire sat in stunned silence for a moment, her sharp lawyer's mind already working. Then she leaned forward, her voice steady and calm. Emily, this is fraud. It's inheritance, theft, plain and simple. And if you have the original documents, the will, the letters, you have a case. A strong one. Her certainty steadied me. For the first time in days, I felt less like a lost child and more like a woman standing on the brink of justice. But they'll fight me, I whispered. They'll twist everything. They'll call me unstable. They already think I'm naive. Then we'll outsmart them, Claire said firmly. We'll build this step by step. First, we gather every piece of evidence, documents, recordings, witnesses. We don't just accuse them, we prove it. Her eyes met mine, fierce and unyielding. Emily, they've stolen enough from you, it's time to take it back. Her words struck something deep inside me. For years, I had been silent, swallowing the pain, convincing myself that love meant patience. That family meant loyalty, no matter what. But silence had only made me weaker, easier to manipulate. Sitting there with Claire, I realized I had a choice. I could keep being the naive girl they mocked, or I could fight. I want to do it, I said, my voice trembling but resolute. I want to fight back. Claire's lips curved into the faintest smile. Good. Then here's what we'll do. And she spread the documents across the table like puzzle pieces, her lawyer's mind dissecting every line. She pointed to the will. This is our foundation. Your father's original intent is clear. Half for you, half for Rachel. That alone is enough to prove Margaret and Rachel manipulated the estate. She tapped the bundle of letters. These are powerful too, especially the one addressed to Margaret. It shows she knew your father's wishes and deliberately ignored them. That's intent, that's concealment. Her finger moved to the birth certificate. This ties you to Isabel. It establishes who you really are, the daughter of Franklin and Isabel, not Margaret. That's crucial. I listened, my heart racing. Claire was building something solid out of the chaos, weaving my pain into a strategy. But we'll need more, she continued. We'll need proof that Margaret and Rachel acted on this. Bank records, property transfers, communications with the lawyer. And we'll need their own words. Admissions. My stomach tightened. You mean I have to talk to them? Not talk. Record, Claire said. Get them comfortable, get them thinking you don't know the whole story. Then push gently until they admit what they've done. Washington is a two-party consent state, so normally recordings are tricky. But if they volunteer the truth to you, in conversation, we can use it to pressure them. Even if it's not admissible in court, it can break them down, make them slip elsewhere. I nodded slowly, the weight of her plan settling over me. It was dangerous. It was terrifying. But it was also necessary. Claire reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You've been through hell, Emily. But you're stronger than you think. And you're not alone. I'm with you. Her words cracked something open inside me. The grief, the rage, the heartbreak, they were still there, but for the first time, I felt them shifting, hardening into something sharper. Motivation. Determination. That night, we stayed up late, drafting a list of what we needed. The lawyer who had read the false will, financial records showing where the inheritance went, testimonies from anyone who had noticed Margaret's favoritism. Piece by piece, we would build a case so strong that they couldn't wriggle free. When Claire finally left, promising to call in favors at her firm to start pulling records, I sat alone in the quiet room. The documents lay spread around me like ghosts of the life I should have had. I picked up one of my father's letters again, the one where he wrote about Isabel singing to me as a baby. She loved you, Emily. She loved you with all her heart. You are her daughter in every way that matters. I pressed the letter to my chest, letting the words anchor me. I had spent so long defining myself by what I lacked: Margaret's affection, Rachel's approval, Daniel's loyalty. But I wasn't lacking. I wasn't empty. I was Isabel's daughter. My strength came from her, from the love she had poured into me in the short months before she was taken away. And now, it was my turn to fight for her. The next morning, Claire called with an update. I've already spoken to a colleague about the lawyer Margaret used. His name's Richard Grant. He's been practicing for years, but there have been whispers about questionable ethics. If he cooperated in presenting a falsified will, we can nail him. My pulse quickened. The thought of confronting the man who had helped bury my inheritance filled me with both fear and fury. Emily, Claire said gently, this won't be easy. They'll try to paint you as bitter, unstable, maybe even delusional. You need to be ready for that. I am, I said quietly, and for the first time, I truly believed it. That evening, I took the first step. I texted Rachel, asking if she and Mom could come over for dinner later in the week. I wrote that I wanted to apologize for being distant, that I thought it was time we put family tensions behind us. It was bait. And I prayed they would take it. Almost immediately, Rachel replied. Fine. Friday at 7. Don't make this dramatic. A bitter smile touched my lips. She had no idea what kind of drama was waiting. When I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the hotel mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my face pale. But there was something new there, too still. I wasn't the same Emily who had tiptoed around her family, desperate for scraps of love. I was someone else now. Someone forged in betrayal. I whispered into the silence, a vow to myself, to Isabel, to the father who had begged Margaret to tell me the truth. They thought I was naive, they thought I'd stay quiet, but I'm going to make them regret every lie they ever told me. And in that moment, I knew, the war had only just begun. Friday night arrived like a storm I had been waiting for my whole life. Every nerve in my body thrummed with equal parts dread and anticipation. I had spent the last few days rehearsing every word, every glance, every pause. Claire had helped me refine my strategy, reminding me that sometimes the best weapon was silence, the kind that made people rush to fill it with their own incriminating words. I set the table in my apartment, lit a few candles, and poured wine into the glasses. To anyone else, it looked like an ordinary family dinner. But to me, it was a battlefield disguised in linen napkins and porcelain plates. The documents sat locked in a folder on the sideboard. My phone, hidden near the centerpiece, was already recording. At exactly 7, the knock came. Rachel entered first, her perfume sharp, her smile tight with suspicion. Margaret followed, wearing pearls as though to remind me of her authority. And behind them, Daniel trailed in, his eyes avoiding mine. My chest tightened at the sight of him. Once, that face had been my safe place. Now, it was only a reminder of betrayal. "Emily," Margaret said with a brittle smile, "this is unexpected, but I'm glad you're making an effort." Rachel smirked. "Yeah, let's hope this isn't another one of your melodramas." I forced a polite smile and gestured to the table. "Please. Sit. Tonight is about family." They settled in, the air thick with tension. I poured wine, my hand steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. For a few minutes, I let the conversation drift over meaningless topics, the weather, Rachel's work, Margaret's garden. I let them relax, let them believe I was just the naive Emily they thought they had broken. Then, when the timing felt right, I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "You know," I said softly, "I was looking through some old photos the other day. Funny how there aren't many of me as a baby. Rachel has albums full, but me? Just a handful. Isn't that odd?" Margaret froze, her wineglass halfway to her lips. "Well," she said, her voice too bright. "You know how it was back then. Cameras weren't used as much." "Really?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Because I found a few tucked away in Dad's study. There was one of him holding me at 6 months. Isabel was in the corner of the frame." The name dropped into the room like a bomb. Margaret's face went pale. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Daniel glanced between us, his jaw tightening. I smiled faintly, as though unaware of the earthquake beneath my words. "Strange, isn't it? I never knew Isabel was in the picture." "Literally." Margaret set down her glass with trembling hands. "Emily, darling, this isn't the time." "Oh, but I think it is." I cut in, my voice sharper now. "Because for 32 years, you made sure I didn't know the truth. That Isabel Morales was my mother. That Dad wanted me to know her story. That half his estate belonged to me." Rachel's eyes widened. "Emily, you don't understand." I leaned forward, my gaze locking on hers. "Don't I? I understand that you and Margaret hid the real will. That you let me live believing I was less, that I was unworthy. And I understand that while you were smiling to my face, you were sleeping with my husband behind my back." The silence was suffocating. Rachel's cheeks flushed crimson. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and defensive. "Emily, it's not what you think." "Don't insult me," I snapped. The rage I had buried for days finally surged free. "I heard you. I saw you. I stood outside that bedroom door while you laughed about how naive I was. While you mocked me. While you whispered about the inheritance you thought I'd never know existed." Margaret's composure shattered. "Emily, please." "No," I said firmly, my voice shaking but resolute. "You don't get to plead now. You had 30 years to tell me the truth. Instead, you stole it from me." The room erupted. Rachel stammered excuses, claiming Margaret had pressured her. Margaret wept, insisting she only wanted to protect me from pain. Daniel tried to minimize his betrayal, painting it as a mistake. But I sat still, watching them unravel, letting their panic spill into the air. When their voices overlapped into chaos, I finally raised a hand. "You know what the funniest part is?" I asked quietly. They fell silent, their faces taut with dread. I reached for my phone, turned the screen toward them. I've been recording since you walked through that door. Albe. Margaret gasped. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's face drained of color. I also have the original will, I continued, my voice cold. I have the letters Dad wrote, the birth certificate, and Claire, my lawyer, has copies of everything. Every word you've said tonight is proof of what you've done. No, Rachel whispered, shaking her head. You wouldn't. I would, I said. And I will. Because this isn't just about money, it's about the truth. About my mother, about every lie you fed me to keep me small. Margaret broke then, her shoulders crumpling as sobs tore through her. I did it to protect you, she cried. I didn't want you to feel different. I didn't want you to grow up without a mother. You weren't protecting me, I said, my throat tight. You were protecting yourself. From guilt. From losing control. You made me a stranger in my own family. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. Fine. Maybe you were Dad's favorite. Maybe he loved Isabel more. But you don't deserve everything. I earned my place in this family. By sleeping with my husband? I shot back. By helping cover up fraud? That's not earning. That's stealing. Daniel finally broke his silence, his voice trembling. Emily, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I love you. I laughed bitterly. Love? You destroyed the one thing that mattered most in a marriage, trust. You don't love me. You love what I gave you: comfort, stability, blind loyalty. Well, that Emily is gone. The three of them sat in stunned silence, their faces mirrors of shock and fear. For once, I held the power, and I wasn't going to waste it. I rose from my chair, gathering the folder of documents from the sideboard. This dinner was never about reconciliation, I said. It was about truth. And now, the truth is out. Margaret's voice broke. Emily, please don't take this to court. We can work it out privately. I shook my head. For once in my life, I'm not staying quiet. This goes to court. The world deserves to know what you did. Dad deserves justice. And Isabel deserves to be remembered. Their faces crumpled in defeat. Rachel slammed her fist against the table, muttering curses. Daniel dropped his gaze, shame etched into every line of his face. Margaret wept silently, her empire of lies collapsing around her. I took one last look at them, the family who had betrayed me, the man who had broken my trust. Once, their approval had meant everything. Now, it meant nothing. I'll let my lawyer contact you, I said coldly. Good night. With that, I walked out of my own apartment, leaving them to stew in their ruin. The night air was crisp, sharp against my skin, but I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't the victim. I was the one pulling the strings. As I slid into my car, I whispered into the silence, more to myself than anyone else. They thought I'd stay silent. They thought they'd broken me. But I've only just begun. And in that moment, I knew, the confrontation was over, but the war for justice was only beginning. The weeks after that dinner felt like walking through fire, but this time I didn't walk alone. With Claire by my side, I filed the lawsuit. The hearings dragged on, each session peeling back another layer of deceit my family had tried so hard to bury. Margaret and Rachel fought viciously at first, their lawyers throwing up smokescreens of excuses. Daniel sat hollow in the courtroom, stripped of his arrogance, his eyes darting away from mine whenever I entered. But lies have short legs, and eventually, the truth outran them. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. The hidden will was validated. My father's wishes restored. Half of his estate returned to me. Margaret and Rachel were convicted of fraud, their carefully polished reputations crumbling into dust. Daniel walked away with nothing but shame, abandoned by the very people he betrayed me for. For once, justice didn't just knock, it burst through the door. When the dust settled, I packed what mattered and left Seattle behind. Austin, Texas became my new beginning, a place where no shadows of betrayal could follow me. I rented a modest house with wide windows that let the sunlight in, each ray reminding me that freedom was mine now. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe without fear of who might be lying behind my back. I made a choice that surprised even me. I reclaimed my mother's last name. From that day forward, I was Emily Morales, not the daughter of secrecy and manipulation, but the daughter of Isabel Morales, a woman whose love had lived in my father's letters. Carrying her name felt like finally carrying my true self. Healing, however, wasn't just about money or names. I knew I couldn't keep my story locked inside me. I began speaking at support groups for women who had been betrayed by partners, by family, by the people who should have protected them most. Each time I told my story, I saw recognition in their eyes, and I felt less alone. My pain became a bridge, connecting me to women who needed to hear that survival was possible, that silence was not their only option. Months later, I flew to California, where Isabel had been buried. I carried fresh lilies, her favorite, according to Dad's letters, and stood before the simple headstone. For a long moment, words caught in my throat. Then, I let them out. "Mom," I whispered, my hand trembling against the stone. "I know who I am now. I know who you were. They tried to erase you, but I'll never let them succeed. I'll carry your name, your strength, and your love into every part of my life." Tears slid down my cheeks, but they weren't only from sorrow. They were cleansing, like rain washing away the last traces of a storm. I stepped back, inhaled the crisp air, and smiled through the tears. "I promise I'll live honestly. I promise I'll live free. And I promise I'll live for both of us." For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't lost. I was found. Looking back on everything I went through, I realized the greatest lesson hidden inside all the pain. Silence only protects those who hurt you. For years, I convinced myself that avoiding conflict meant preserving family, but in truth, it only erased me. Betrayal shattered me first as a wife, then as a daughter and sister, but it also forced me to face the truth I had been too afraid to ask. What I discovered was not only lies about my marriage and inheritance, but about my own identity. And yet, even in the ruins, I found strength I didn't know I had. I learned that family is not defined by blood or by the stories others force upon you. It is defined by honesty, respect, and love that doesn't require you to shrink yourself to fit. Taking back my name, my voice, and my future was not just about justice in court, it was about justice within myself. To anyone who feels trapped in betrayal or manipulation, know this. You are not powerless. The moment you choose truth over silence, you reclaim your life. And that choice can turn even the deepest wound into a path toward freedom. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.